All right, welcome everyone. This is the recent installment of GPEC's Regional Report Series. I'm Chris Camacho, the President and CEO here at GPEC. Glad that you can join us. Thanks for tuning in. Looking forward to an important conversation about the current and future energy consumption demands for the Metro Phoenix region. Important topic in terms of the balance between reliability, affordability, and innovation. So today, I feel very fortunate to have both Ted Geisler, President of Arizona Public Service, as well as Jim Pratt, the General Manager and CEO of Salt River Project. Thanks for both of you joining me today. A few housekeeping items just quickly, because I do believe we have 500 to 600 RSVPs on for today. So just for everybody joining, we will have approximately 60 minutes or so that this will run. We'll be sharing more of the feedback on our social media channels, and also you're able to submit any questions that you may have through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we will work to get through as many of those as we can. So Jim and Ted, are you both on? I can't see your pretty mugs here today, so.
Yep, we're here, Chris. Thanks for having us.
All right,
we're ready. Thank you.
There we go. Well, thanks to you both for joining us. This is an absolutely critical topic for economic developers and building a dynamic innovation-centered economy. So no better than the two of you to have talk about this important subject. So again, for those that are viewing, if you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A. I'm going to be monitoring that throughout the session today, and I'll kind of eyeball that back and forth. I also have a list of questions here that I was just that were burning for me over the Thanksgiving holiday season. I couldn't wait to ask Ted and Jim, so we will do so today. So let's just dive right in. I'll start with you, Jim. Do you want to give just a brief introduction to yourself, your background? I would say you're newly minted, but probably not newly minted any longer for SRP. But do you want to give a brief intro? Then I'll turn it over to Ted.
Sure, I'll try to make it really quick. I've actually been with SRP a little under 40 years. Have an engineering background. I've been very fortunate to work in many aspects of our business. Pretty diverse over all those years. So very fortunate, everything from customer stuff and grid modernization and power plants and different things like that. So that's just the thumbnail sketch. And so I'm very fortunate. Been in my current role as the CEO for about 6 months. In terms of SRP as a whole, we have about a little over 1.1 million customers. We primarily serve a greater part of the Phoenix metro area, and then what we call the eastern mining area. So think of all the copper mines that stretch out east of the metro area up, through the Globe, Miami kind of area, and some of the stuff up near Roosevelt Lake. But most of it really is in the urban area.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And Ted, you want to talk a little bit about your background as well as Arizona Public Service?
Yeah, happy to, Chris. And thanks to you and GPEC for hosting this important forum. Always an honor to get to speak with Jim. I admire his long tenure in the industry and expertise. And of course, APS and SRP, I'm proud to say that we're very close partners in our obligation to serve one of the largest and fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. I've been with the Arizona Public Service starting back about 23 years ago. Spent time in generation, transmission, distribution, our solar development group. IT was our financial officer for a few years, and then began serving our customers about a year and a half ago in the current role as president. So honored and humbled to be able to be here serving the state I grew up in, like Jim, and just love our opportunity to be able to continue to support the state's growth. APS has been around since 1886. We serve about half of Phoenix, the other half, as Jim said, SRP. And then we serve most of the rest of the state with the exception of Tucson. So 11 of the 15 counties, about 35,000 square miles of service territory. So a lot of rural territory in there, as well as an important part of the Phoenix metropolitan area, of course. We've got about 6,000 team members throughout the state, including about 2,000 that work at Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. Our peak demand is similar to SRP's, a little over 8,000 megawatts this past summer and growing. And one distinct difference I think between the two of us is APS is investor owned. Our parent company, Pinnacle West, is traded on New York Stock Exchange, and that's an important aspect of how we raise capital to be able to finance our grid growth. So again, happy to be here.
Thank you, Ted. And I would acknowledge for the entire audience here today, what an incredible background you have. Not to look past you today, but what an impressive background you have there with the red rocks of Sedona in Oak Creek Canyon. So beautiful.
Appreciate that. I put it on so that you don't have to just stare at my face the whole time.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a sight to see. I try to explain this to people, the changing landscapes within 2 hours of Phoenix. And
Right.
if you're coming in from Germany or Asia, you try to understand that this is more than a desert, but it's not easy to convince people until they see it. So, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks to you both for.
Yeah, sorry, we just had that discussion before you jumped on. Was most people think of it? I think Ted said it as cactus and sand, and Arizona is actually pretty diverse.
Yeah, and Jim, you say that I have had the chance to take your watershed tour, a few times over the past 15 years, and that's another thing that really shocks people to see how well we've planned our storied water history. Unfortunately, we don't get necessarily the coverage we all wish we had, but in the national press. But nonetheless, that's a really good bird's eye view of the watershed capacity that's been built here to support Greater Phoenix. So let's just dive right in to the first kind of set of questions here. Feel free, Ted, since I went to you first, I'll just ask you, or recently I'll ask you to answer the question. Let's talk a little bit about the energy landscape in the US and then the energy landscape in Arizona. And to kind of set that up, it probably goes without saying, but we're one of the most attractive manufacturing hubs of the country right now, and everything from semiconductors to advanced electronics to EVs to climate tech. Tremendous amount of momentum exists for manufacturing, mission critical facilities. Pretty much all of the industrial era that we'd hoped for 20 years ago to happen is happening. And in talking to my peers nationally that run major US markets and their energy providers, there's certainly kind of stress across the US in terms of the magnitude of demand. So would you provide, or be willing just to provide a little bit of color to what you both see on the national landscape, and then what do you see, what does that mean for Arizona kind of near term, maybe even long term? Who wants to tackle that, Ted?
Yeah, happy to, Chris. Undoubtedly, I think our biggest strategic imperative over the next decade or so is going to be building out the grid fast enough to keep up with society's growth. That is definitely a top priority that all teams within the company and frankly, I think our industry collectively is focused on. Really, when you look at it in simple form, the grid needs to double in size over the next 15 years based on what we expect is being driven by a variety of societal factors. Mass electrification is one of them, whether it be electric vehicles or just simply the conversion of more dependency on electricity. Computing demands is the second biggest driver, data centers, the expansion of AI. And then the third is really industrial reshoring. For the last 10 to 15 years, we saw an exodus of manufacturing and large electric consumption in our country. And a lot of that's coming back. Manufacturing within the Phoenix metro area is a great example of that, whether it be chip manufacturing, electric vehicle manufacturing, et cetera. So those are really the three big drivers we see throughout the United States that is driving exponential growth in electric demand and what's causing the grid to need to double over the next 15 years. But if you zoom in on Arizona specifically, we have those three drivers, but we also have some unique characteristics that are going to put even a greater dependency on the need to build out the grid. We got more severe climate impact. So in California, if you have reliability issues, in some areas, the worst thing that happens is you open the window at night. We don't have that luxury here. We are proud collectively between SRP and APS to have top tier reliability, but in order to keep it that way and recognize that you've got more severe climate impact and a growing heat island within Phoenix, that is increasing the electric demands in the summertime. We have higher population growth than most other areas in the country. And then of course, when you think about data demands and manufacturing demands, Phoenix metropolitan area is a pronounced attractive region for those industries, and our level of growth for data and manufacturing is heightened here compared to elsewhere in the country. And so for all those drivers, it's exciting. And we're thrilled to be able to serve a territory that has such attractiveness and such growth. But it means that we are revamping all of our plans to be able to double the size of the grid over the next 15 years. And that's going to require significant investment in grid infrastructure.
Right. Jim, are you the one that's driving all this new Snapchat and TikTok and all this digital that Ted's talking about?
Exactly. I'm following Ted on Twitter every day. I'm not going to repeat everything Ted said because he's spot on. And Ted kind of mentioned this earlier. I don't think people realize how connected our two companies are. When you look at the Metro Phoenix area, we do joint studies together as an example, because our infrastructure is so intertwined. We have to rely on each other, and we have to make sure that the grid works for everybody. So if I'm sitting there as a customer on here listening today, that's one of the things I think that's important for you to get as a takeaway. When you think about the reliability of this area, that means both of us are collectively and very cooperatively making sure that we, ensure that that happens. Ted did a great job of explaining the growth and the drivers, and that's true. I think maybe the only thing I would add when you look at it on a local basis is, for us, if you looked across the top 10 industries that we serve locally, I think you'd find every one of those is experiencing significant growth. So data centers is certainly huge. We've got a lot of manufacturing. We touched on semiconductor manufacturing. Intel happens to be in our service territory. That's just a massive load for us, and as fast as they're expanding. But it's also everything else that goes along with those things, right? Whether it's healthcare, whether it's grocery stores, or any of those kinds of things. When you've got that much economic growth coming into the territory, it drives all those other things as well, that are kind of the spin-offs, that are the secondary things that happen, including education. Some of the Mesa school system, as an example, is one of our largest customers, right? So it's driven by a lot of different things. And so, but to Ted's point, I would also tell you, I feel very fortunate that we're in that spot. Growth is a whole lot better to manage than, say, contraction. At the end of the day, I feel fortunate. Some of our brethren who aren't in that mode, have a different challenge ahead of them. I think the other thing I would just mention is that it's certainly an interesting time in our industry. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges, but I don't know that customers have ever been as interested in electricity as they are today, because of the way it's touching them in so many different aspects of their lives, of things that maybe now they think about more than they ever did before.
Well, Jim, I can tell you on the front lines, working with companies, the amount of review and data due diligence they're doing on the grid and stability of the grid. You talked about even like JD Power and Associates reliability index. Our utilities are constantly in the top, 90th plus percentile, often with those third-party ratings. And when we're competing with places like California or Texas, it seems like yes, cost always matters, infrastructure matters, but probably more recently, because of the sheer capital investment levels going up, because of machine learning, because of AI integration. Both cloud and manufacturing investments that are looking at these respective markets, it seems like the evaluation of the real resiliency of the grid and pricing, and observing what happened with that pretty intense storm that occurred in Dallas and Austin a couple of years ago. Many people thought, well, Texas's grid could never go down. Well, it went down, and it affected a number of different kinds of major users that need 100% runtime, 365, 7 days a week, right? So how do you guys think about reliability and planning for reliability? Because that seems to be number one now for advanced industries. And I know you've touched on it a little bit, but it's got to be so many different things. You talked about climate, weatherization, all the diverse generation portfolios, any kind of reaction for the audience? Because, I mean, being a utility leader can't be easy, because we just expect it to work. And when you have these external factors sometimes that happen, whether it's extreme heat or snowpack like they had in Texas that year, what are your thoughts on that front?
That is always what you say, is you just want it to work. I would say that's accurate. So Ted, I'll throw something out, and then you jump on here. As you know, Chris, you kind of, and you touched on water earlier a little bit, and I know that's not the topic of this, but you know, you kind of commented on people maybe not really understanding the water situation. I would almost put the power in that exact same, you know, scenario. And the reason I say that is both of those things, whether it's a secure water supply or a secure power supply, which we do have both of those. I mean, we really do, is it really comes down to very good, rigorous, long-term planning. And you've got to, you know, recognize in our industry, you know, that's just huge to us. I think people forget sometimes that sometimes, you know, Ted and I have talked about this before. We're going to put a transmission line in, and the two of us partner on these things a lot. You're talking about an asset that you're planning on for 75, maybe 100 years even, right? So that kind of planning effort is one of the really big keys that delivers on having that level of reliability. I know there may be some in the audience that might not even agree with this next statement, but you know, Ted was talking about some of the differences with us. The other thing where we're very similar is we're both still vertically integrated utilities. Okay. So we basically cover that plan from, you know, one end to the other, right? From the very beginning of whatever generation you need through transmission and distribution and metering and everything else. And so that's one benefit of that, quite frankly, is you're able to take a big picture overview of things and really, really look long term. And you've got to recognize, and you said this, that your customers, our customers, are saying the same thing. We know from all the work that we do that when it comes to a lot of the very large commercial and industrial customers, especially those that have come in recently, as you said, price always matters, but reliability is huge to them. And but then we know for our residential customers, affordability comes to be just a little bit higher than reliability, but they're kind of, you know, right there at the end of the day. And so both of those are just, you've got to know what it is that customers are after, and then make sure you're working to drive to be successful at that.
Yeah, Jim, I think you said it well. I couldn't agree more. I often share with our customers that when you look at a typical electric bill, you see line items for generation and delivery, et cetera, but nothing on there for planning. Yet I would contend that's one of the most important things we do as utilities. To that end, Jim's team and the APS team both recently filed new 15-year plans for how we're going to build out generation resources over the next decade and a half to meet Arizona's growth. And that's the time horizon at which we're working towards right now to try to continue to support growth in the region, and that's critical. I'd also underscore a point that Jim made around being vertically integrated utilities. SRP and APS both have that responsibility. That's a key difference between what you see in Arizona versus, for example, what was one of the contributing causes in Texas on that Valentine's week a few years ago. In Texas, there's no single entity responsible for reliability within a given service territory. It's a deregulated market. And so the absence of that single entity with full responsibility and accountability for ensuring dedicated, reliable service is part of what led to there being a lack of capacity at a time when Texans needed it the most. And then you look at the other side of our state, California, there's been challenges for many years on consistent reliability, particularly through the summer. And there's many reasons for that, but one of them that I think I'm proud of within our state that's a difference between Arizona and California is we're committed to a plan of decarbonization, but we're doing it in a gradual manner that doesn't put reliability at risk. And that's really important. You know, California outlawed coal 15 years earlier than what our current resource plans show that we're going to be exiting coal. We need a gradual transition. We're still going to get to the same end state, but we're going to do it in a manner that it isn't going to put reliability at risk. And we also embrace nuclear as a carbon-free resource within this state that is low cost, reliable, and carbon-free. And that's a difference in our position as well. So both of those tie back, Chris, to your point of reliability and resiliency is front of mind for both utilities and is critical to our ability to serve reliably, have a good track record in the past, and we'll keep maintaining that strong track record going forward.
Yeah, Ted, you mentioned carbon-free commitments. That seems to be the talk of the town these days, and utilities are down that path as well, and even have made commitments. I'm going back to my days of the RPS standard years ago, and you know, now you've made some long-term commitments to carbon-free. What does that mean? Because I think the business owners and a lot of the even clients we're talking to. And I do want to come back to your resource plan, because that is something else we oftentimes, maybe I'll just touch on that for a moment. We often get asked, how are you planning for the Metro Phoenix of 2040? It's not just static today environment, but everything from labor to infrastructure, transportation, connectivity, utilities. That's the new conversation we're having with clients that are talking about, multi-billion-dollar investments that, again, they're hedging on a return on cost of capital today, that they're going to make these investments and garner that return. And so they're looking at it much like you are, as Jim stated, in transmission. This is not a short-term investment scheme. So that's hence why they want to understand, how serious are we about long-range planning. And so look forward to integrating that into those submissions into how we think about our future messaging to our clients. But as it relates to carbon free, so there's a lot of discussion about solar and renewable energy. I know both utilities have delved into storage. Storage seems to be a very critical linchpin to the adoption of renewables. You mentioned Palo Verde, Ted, and I'll come back to that. But let's talk a little bit about the carbon-free commitments that each utility has made and how you expect to solve or meet those goals that you set forth. You want to touch on that first, Jim?
Sure. And you're right. I would say for both of us, I want to just make sure I acknowledge, Ted's comment on how you get there in a transition mode, right, versus overnight. And it's not that we're not prioritizing sustainability. The key at the end of the day is, if you want to be reliable, though, you've got to be able to figure out how you're going to go do that. And I know some people, we get this challenge all the time. Well, why can't you just do it overnight? Well, as much as everybody thinks some of those technologies are completely mature, there's that struggle. There's a struggle with supply chain at the moment. We're adding solar as fast as we possibly can, but we can't even get, a lot of the projects. I think every single solar project we have right now is delayed at least 6 months, if not, further. And some of those could probably stretch out, to even a couple of years. And so there's always those kinds of challenges, and those aren't excuses. It's just the reality of the situation that you're in. So I think a good example for us would be is that by 2035, so even just 10 years from now, we're going to add about 20,000 megawatts of capacity. 90% of that will be renewables. So it'll be solar and batteries. The other 10% will be some form of gas. And you will hear some people talk about, well, you'll never add fossil. One of the reasons that you'll hear us talk about that is that you are going to have a bridge fuel between now and somewhere in that 2040, 2050 timeframe, where you figure out how some of these other solutions like small modular nuclear reactors or something like that, comes into play. And so we know that we're going to have to do that, but that's a significant addition. So, to your point, Chris, about how do we convince people that we're doing it the right way is, and that long-term planning that I mentioned earlier is, when you look at that capacity amount that I just mentioned, and Ted was talking about doubling earlier in 15 years, just recognize that sometimes capacity is not all equal, right? So you put in X amount of capacity of a solar site, it doesn't generate 24 hours a day like a gas plant or a coal plant or a nuclear plant, things like that. So you've got to lay out that transition. Both of us have long-term plans where we will exit out of coal. Eventually it'll be all of the coal will be gone. But recognize you do give up some diversity when you do that. And I'm not touting all the benefits of coal. I get the carbon aspect, but today, one of the nice things is, just to kind of put a fine point on this, is you can have your fuel supply sitting on the ground and you're not subject to certain things, like you were talking about a freeze in Texas. Well, you're not very worried about that, right? So as you phase out coal, there's one aspect of diversity that you give up, and you've got to figure out how to replace that with other things. And so, that's not as simple as it sounds. And so that taking that approach, even though we're being very aggressive on laying out where we're going to be over the next several years. So our reduction right now looks like will be about 67% or more. We're revising this right now, but we'll be down that much by 2035. By 2050, be down, over 90%. We're taking a hard look at, can we just be net zero, by 2050? And that's a recognition for us at the moment, where we still think that, and this is based on a lot of research work that Electric Power Research Institute and others have done. Right now, it seems like you're going to have to kind of keep all the above, so to speak, available and not scratch anything off the list until you get a little bit further down the road with some of the technologies. There's a lot of money being put into some of those technologies where you may have to do things to just offset carbon, but you may still need some carbon resources to be able to maintain, that reliability that we're talking about.
Yeah,
and
great
I
points,
think
Richard. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Chris. I was just say, I think our companies have very similar plans. I sort of think about it through two dimensions. One is more within the next sort of 5 to 10 years, an action plan window, if you will. 2030, we expect to be 65% carbon free. The technology exists today to get there. We're actively procuring or developing those technologies or those projects to be able to achieve that goal. And it is absolutely achievable. And then the second dimension is, well, how do you bridge the gap between 65% and somewhere closer to 90 or 100%? Our aspirational goal is 100% carbon free by 2050. That'll be a blend of existing technology that exists today, but then also new technology. And so when companies like SRP and APS set goals like that out in the future, it's a signal that we're trying to send to the innovators and the supply side saying, we need help to develop some of the new technology to be able to bridge that gap and get to entirely carbon free or nearly entirely carbon free. Our current clean energy portfolio rests on the bedrock of nuclear. Palo Verde Generating Station, the largest clean energy resource in the country. Both our companies benefit from that output. And I think in order to get to carbon free, by the time you get to the 2050 time period, new nuclear is going to have to be a part of the equation. But between now and then, we're blessed with some of the best solar irradiance on the planet. So solar coupled with utility scale battery storage is a great resource here. But as Jim said, solar and battery storage doesn't alone keep the lights on. You still need the existing natural gas fleet and some incremental new natural gas to ensure reliability as we're making this transition. And then the only other item I'd mention is we believe looking forward, our customers are actually going to be more of a part of the solution than maybe we've thought of them in the past. Virtual power plants is a great resource where we can incentivize our customers, for example, in the summertime to maybe get a discount on their bill if they raise their thermostat by a degree or two during the top 10 or 20 hottest days of the summer. And when you aggregate that amongst 100,000 or 200,000 residential customers, that's the same equivalent savings of building a whole new power plant. Yet it's carbon free and your customers save money in doing it. So we think that's going to be a promising part of the equation going forward, is engaging more of the customers for demand response and virtual power plants.
So Ted, how do you auto-enroll your family so that they cannot change that demand response plan? Because I can see my daughter and my wife have an issue with that. I'd rather just automatically enroll. It's like an automatic deduction from your paycheck, right?
I highly advise you not to do that.
Well, let me ask you, I think you both mentioned micro nukes, fusion. One of the questions that came in is how far out are we, and even hydrogen as a component of this? Like, where do we see all this fitting in complementary? And the reason I ask that is, I hear a lot of those questions across the country. Why don't we just move faster to either expanding Palo Verde or micro nukes or fusion down the road? I mean, what are your thoughts in general about some of these kind of talked about technologies? Not to put you on the spot, but I am curious, like, how would you describe the potential that's before us in each of those areas?
Well, certainly the potential is great, right? The key is, and you touched on it, which is the timing that you're going to be talking about. So let me try to piece those out a little bit on each one of those real quick. Is small modular reactors, and depending on who you talk to, some people would say, you're only a decade away. Others would probably push that out to about 15 years or so. Recently, there was an announcement by one of those technologies called NuScale, where the project that they were working on that was going to be the first one in Idaho kind of has come unraveled, right? And it was really driven by, cost issues, economic issues, and things like that, which are real, right? So remember how our industry is kind of ran. You're not going to go out and take these huge risks, even though Ted and I talked about earlier, investor-owned versus a not-for-profit, right? At the end of the day, the financial aspects of that are huge. So if you're going to be serial number one in something, you're taking on a lot of risk, right? So I'll tell you what one of my struggles is that I believe today, some people that I say this to may not agree with this, but if as a country you really want to decarbonize, then I do believe that nuclear has to be part of that solution long term. And if you want to achieve that, I would say it's not up to the government to go out and just build them and make that happen. But I do believe the government has the technology today to be able to get small modular reactors across the finish line. Then you would get rid of some of that, I'll say, risk that people would have in being able to go get those installed and completed. So I'll try to keep it there, and then Ted can maybe add on to that in a second. But I think that's a key, right? When it comes to building large scale nuclear, there's only one plant in the country that's, one of their 2 units has just come online. The other one, I think, may have just come online. But huge cost overruns, huge time delays. Those are not things that, either one of us are interested in trying to stomach, because that's a direct impact to our customers, of course. So that's big. When it comes to hydrogen, I believe hydrogen will be part of the solution down the road, but recognize today, look at the natural gas infrastructure that exists in the US. You have none of that really for hydrogen today. There's no hydrogen pipelines. The production facilities are not there. There's a lot of things that have to happen. Now, out in that 2040, 2050 timeframe, is there a chance that some of that would be, completed? There'll be other small things that happen before that. And when you look at the gas generation that Ted and I are both talking about installing, it'll be able to run on hydrogen. It's just, when will you have the infrastructure, to be able, to do that in a reliable fashion, which goes back to why you hear both of us telling you you're going to have to use natural gas as a bridge fuel to be able to get through there. And I'll just even make this comment, because I know that there's a lot of people that would say they don't agree with that. But one of the strongest indicators to me was, EPA is working on a carbon rule, I'll call it right now. Even in that rule, they recognize some exclusions for what we call simple cycle gas turbines, but really these aeroderivatives that are basically a jet engine that you mount on the ground. If you're running them at a fairly low capacity factor, they're not going to worry about those at the moment. And the reason is, I think they've recognized, even through all the research that the federal government has done, you've got a gap between now and getting out to these new things that we're talking about that are, let's just say, 15, 20 plus years out there. Ted, I'll shut up there and let you add some to that.
No, all great points, and I agree with that entirely. I agree also that we're not going to be successful as a country getting to 100% carbon free without new nuclear, and the challenge is investing in the early stages of new nuclear at this point to get it scalable. So all of us utilities are anxious to get to that point to where it's commercially viable at a scalable level, but we're just not there yet. And so hard to put a date on when we'll get there, but I think mid 2030s or beyond is probably more realistic than sooner than that. The good news is Palo Verde currently provides 70% of Arizona's carbon-free energy today, and it's the youngest greenfield nuclear generating station in the United States. It's currently licensed through the mid 2040s, and we're working now on the beginning stages to be able to operate it well beyond that. So we're going to benefit from the state's existing healthy nuclear supply for many decades to come. And then, of course, you couple that with solar, some wind, battery storage, you start to get a pretty healthy, clean mix. I think when we think about that new technology, we got to be open-minded to what the marketplace is going to innovate as well. And so that's the benefit of having these all-source RFPs, where as utilities, we put a signal out to the market describing how much energy or capacity we need to procure in future years, and allow the market to propose to us competitive proposals. And our job as a utility is to review and vet what is technology, what is viable from a technology standpoint, ensuring we're not putting customer reliability at risk, what is the most cost competitive. And as the market and the country continues to innovate and this technology gets more proven, we're absolutely open to new methods and new technologies to be able to achieve carbon reduction in a reliable manner. But it's got to compete well from an affordability standpoint too. And then I'll just underscore one point Jim made. All the new gas that's getting installed going forward, it's clean capable. So it's not producing carbon forever. At the point at which you've got a reliable fuel source to make it carbon-free, hydrogen being the most likely candidate, we've got a path to be able to benefit from the reliability that's produced from the natural gas fleet, but transition it to carbon-free at the appropriate time in the future.
You know, Chris, I'd just add, I'm not sure Ted gives himself enough credit on this part. APS does a really good job of running Palo Verde. I think you'd find if Ted and I thought we could reliably, from a financial perspective and a schedule perspective, go out and do small modular reactor together at the moment, you'd probably find us doing that. We partner very well at Palo Verde today, and I'd be thrilled to do that. The issue is exactly what Ted said, and I don't want to, one of the reasons I want to highlight that is so that people recognize, I think you'd find both of us are all in, but there's a lot of risk there at the moment. And so if you say, well, I'm going to go be the first one to really get that done, and there's some other people in the country that are looking at it, right? And I think what you'd find is that that's why I say it's going to take, in my opinion, the federal government to drive making that happen quicker if we really want to decarbonize it on the timelines that you're hearing thrown around out there.
Let me see if I can get you guys to disagree on something. So were you both excited with the Territorial Cup going or staying in Tucson? Is that exciting or not exciting? I have half the staff here excited about it, the other half not so much. I won't make you comment on that, but
no, it's okay. Well, yeah, I'm fortunate. I didn't go to either one, so I kind of get to play whichever side I want. So I'm okay.
All right.
Well, I'd say anything Phoenix or North is obviously the preference for any of those events.
Very diplomatic way to answer that question.
Good way to make use of the beauty of our entire state. So at the end of the day, it's still in Arizona and fully support it.
Well, let me ask you guys, about another, I guess, kind of extended topic that just came in from one of the questions. Or from the audience. So data centers, cloud computing, edge computing, co-location, enterprise use, demand. We talked about Jim's social accounts spiking this already, but how are you managing or handling that within each of your respective service territories? Where I remember a decade ago, a 30 megawatt project was a large scale project with high load factor and high consumption use. Now we're saying, I won't get to the full scale because you both know of this, but just the sheer volume or scale of each of these newer data centers, how is that altering the thinking of the utility, or how are you supporting your current customers and planning for future customers? Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can start on that.
Ahead.
Okay. I think you raise a very important point, Chris, and let's put in perspective for a moment. For decades, a significant customer, at least for APS, the largest single site user that you may have was, let's say, a mine location, and maybe they were in the range of 50 to 70 megawatts, and you only had a few of them in your entire service territory. And for the longest time, that was as big as it gets. To also put in perspective, a big box store, one that we may be familiar with, in any one of our neighborhoods, in Arizona, at least with air conditioning, et cetera, generally about a megawatt in size. And every megawatt here is about 140 to 160 residential customers. So just to sort of put in perspective usage, not uncommon right now to get multiple data center applications in the range of 300 to 400 megawatts per facility. Manufacturing locations in the range of several hundred megawatts, and all at once. So while we're thrilled and excited for the growth and the demands this will bring our geography going forward, we have to recognize that it's a different demand on the grid than what utilities have seen for decades. And this isn't unique to Arizona. We've seen this throughout the country. I think where APS and SRP are both focused and committed is to ensure that we don't overcommit, that we're going to connect customers as quickly as we're able to build out the grid. And we are extremely focused on building out that grid as fast as possible. But we've seen some other utilities in the country overcommit and fall short on their planning. And as a result, you're putting some of these new customers in a difficult spot to where they're building out facilities and then have to wait sometimes up to years before the transmission or generation capacity is actually available to serve them. I'd rather give a realistic time frame up front, even if it potentially means it not being as quick as a new large customer would like, but at least allow them to plan their business prudently. And then know that when we give you that timeline, you can take it to the bank, you can count on it. And we're going to be there reliably to serve you from that point going forward. But that's a real big focus for us, is ensuring that we're planning ahead responsibly, building out the grid to accommodate this growth, but doing it in a way that doesn't compromise reliability in the process. One of the tools that we have to use is to create a queuing process. And so as customers come in with their applications, we vet the customer, we identify the location, we review where they are in the queue in terms of utilizing transmission or generation capacity, and then we serve them in the order at which they came in and in the order at which the infrastructure could be built to be able to take care of them reliably.
You know, Chris, I think I would completely agree with Ted. I'll add just a couple things maybe. Is one of those big ones would be, especially for anybody who may be on this call that kind of, you know, works or deals in that part of the industry, is one of the keys I would say is, and I've told some of the very large data center customers we have this, is as much as you can communicate with us as early and as often as you can is a plus for everybody. And the reason is, you know, they are very large loads. It matters where you decide to put those physically on the grid. That has a lot to do with how we can serve it and be reliable at the same time. Another part is, and I know this is always hard because sometimes the customer isn't certain, but what's their real ramp rate, right? So it may be a 300 megawatt project, and sometimes, to be honest, people will come in the door and say, well, I'm going to be there in like 2 years. And I got to be honest with you, I've never seen that happen, right? So we have to turn around and try to figure out, by working with multiple customers, what does that really look like? Because we've got to go out and be able to, you know, either build assets at times like transmission or things, or procure or build generation to meet that load. And to Ted's point, you don't want to overcommit, overbuild, or anything else. At the same time, you want to right size that. But I realize it's not that simple for the customer at times either. But as much as we can communicate on it, it's really, really important. And the other part is, most of those, and Chris, you know, you're kind of responsible for this because you guys keep bringing in some very top tier customers, which is a good thing, you know, so I'm only kidding, but everybody wants to be 100% green, right? Well, the struggle at the moment is there's just not enough green that we can add to be able to keep up with that fast enough. So there's other things that we're doing with some of our existing customers at the moment to try to help them green up their load. Sometimes I think some people may have to understand we may have to buy RECs until we're able to green some of that up. And, you know, a lot of that has to do with another part, which maybe you want to get into, but is one of the single biggest things at the end of the day, long term, will be our ability to build long transmission lines. And that's a whole other point of discussion probably, you know, within this, but that's a big chunk of it.
You know, Jim, if I can just add one point on, I think you offered some helpful aspects for folks to consider when bringing new large energy demands onto the grid. When you think about Arizona and the way our customers typically use energy, even commercial customers, it's very peaky, largely due to air conditioning, meaning our summertime demand on the grid is substantially different than it is on days like today. And so when you think about it, 8,760 hours in a year that we're all planning for as utility operators, the grid is stressed really only about 500 to 1,000 hours of that entire spectrum. And so anything we can do also to work with our customers to get creative about how to mitigate or minimize some of that demand during those top 500 hours or so, that's also a solution to be able to accelerate new interconnections. And when we bring that opportunity to some of our new customers wanting to connect, it's been enlightening for me to be able to see that through that utility customer partnership, there's ways that we can actually partner with our customers to help conserve or reduce energy demand during those top 500 hours. And then all remaining hours of the year, you're actually utilizing what's already underutilized capacity on the grid in an efficient manner. So I think together we'll be able to plan accordingly, build new infrastructure, and connect new demand, but it's going to have to be done through that partnership and open dialogue.
Before I come back to transmission, because I do want to talk about the Western grid and how that's different from other transmission connectivity across the US and how many states are involved in all of that. I want to ask a little bit about electric vehicles and solar distributed generation. We're seeing a lot of activity in the United States around producing vehicles, electric vehicles, around solar panel and even solar cell manufacturing. What are your thoughts on, initially there was a lot of speculation. What happens to the grid when you onboard a lot of distributed generation? Is that a good thing? Is it a good thing if it's done, over a staged time period? Like, what's your response to that? Because I think that question came in around stability of the grid as you're onboarding more and more of this distributed capacity in the market.
Well, I'll just say that as a grid operators, one of the aspects that we have to be very mindful of is the reality of when distributed generation is producing energy for the grid versus when our customers demand the most amount of energy from the grid. And if you look at the summertime usage of electricity by our customers within Arizona, at 8 p.m. at night on a June, July, August day, when the sun is fully set, our customers are still at peak levels of energy need, and yet rooftop solar is completely off. And so while we embrace customers choosing to adopt rooftop solar, should the economics make sense for them, and our job is to provide a grid that allows them to plug in that device and make use of it, it doesn't defer the amount of infrastructure that we are still responsible for building and operating, because at the time our customers still need the grid the most, rooftop solar is off. And as a result, we have to be realistic about the fact that the grid still needs to be there for those customers that do have rooftop solar, even though they may still be installing it for some of those daytime hours.
Yeah, Chris, I would add, I completely agree with the idea that, our goal is to enable customers to be able to do what they want to do, right? I mean, I think that's paramount. That's kind of customer choice, right? And that is very important. So if a customer, as Ted mentioned, if a customer wants to put solar on, I think that's wonderful. The key is that all of these different technologies that didn't exist not that many years ago, at least in, let's say, fairly significant scale, right? You do have to go back and decide, how are you going to integrate all those? Because one of the struggles is that when all the solar peels off that Ted's mentioning, well, you got to pick that up with something else. Now, batteries can play that role. Some of the traditional generating units that you have can play that role. That's a good, you always heard California talk about the duck curve and stuff. There's solutions for those. It's just you've got to figure out how you're going to go do those. One of the examples I would give you is we're in the process right now of looking at adding a fairly significant chunk of hydro generation, because we also supply a lot of water to the Metro Phoenix area. We've got several reservoirs, so we've got the ability to take a look at that. That's an example of one of those that solves kind of that issue Ted's mentioned, is that when the solar goes away and you need something that you can start up fast and it can handle load for a while, that's why we're looking at some of those kinds of technologies, because you're going to have to be able to fill some of that gap as well. And recognize that as you move forward in time, because you started to touch on EVs, it's going to get really interesting about, so when do you do that charging, as an example? So you're going to find that today, a lot of people would charge it traditionally. Let's say they drive to work, they come home, they plug in. Well, that might not be the best timing. But let's just say that you can educate customers, and as the grid builds out and charging infrastructure builds out, if somebody is going into the office, which that's a whole nother dynamic that's changed, right? But so somebody goes into the office and they charge during the day when we might have excess solar, well, then that's great. And they're not plugging in at night, right? And so that helps solve part of the problem. So there's going to be a huge customer education, industry education component, that's going to go to that. Another small example might be, we've spent years getting people to recognize, especially in the Metro Phoenix area, do not run your pool pump during the peak time of the day or daytime. Really, we'll tell people run it overnight. Now we're probably going to turn around and say, no, not too far down the road, I want you to run it during the day because I'm going to have excess solar, and I would rather you run it then than I would me have to supply it with something else when it's dark outside. So there's just a whole lot of pieces to that that are going to change. So.
Yeah, those
that's a
price signals are going to be really important to
Yep.
Jim's point, and a utility's ability to incentivize customers to conserve when the grid is stressed and get a discount in their electric usage during those times. And then also incentivize customers to use more during the times at which the grid has excess power. And that'll be an important part of how we interact with our customers going forward in terms of shifting that electric usage.
Yeah, and I'll add one other one to the EV part, I guess. Ted said triggered this for me is, remember, there's some places in the world today that are starting to experiment with, you may send customers a signal that may not just include the price, which is going to be huge, but also might be, well, what's your carbon intensity of the generation mix that you're using right now? So I may send you a signal that says during the middle of the day, carbon intensity is almost nothing because you're going to be using solar. But some other time of the day, it may be more. And you'll have some customers, they're going to care about that. The other part that's getting played with, and we're experimenting with this as well, but this is a whole nother relationship type issue, I would say, with the customer is, we didn't build the distribution grid to do, Ted was talking about the AC load earlier, right? So we built to manage that. Let's just say you had a bunch of people all on the same transformer sitting in front of their house, and they wanted to all charge an EV at the exact same time, on top of it's really, really hot out and you're running all your ACs. Well, it wasn't built to handle that. So one of the things that we're looking at is, what are you going to do to be able to try to manage that EV load and spread it out? So if Chris just plugged in and he's already at 90%, maybe you're not getting anything for a little bit. And Ted might be at 15%, and we know we got to get him charged up, so he's going to get more. Now, there are ways to do some of that stuff, but there's one part that's the technical. The other aspect of that is, what's that relationship with the customer? And is the customer going to trust you to make sure that you deliver on making sure their car is charged up when they need it?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you're talking about demand response, both communication infrastructure with your customers, but also potential innovation that could come from this. And I'm thinking back to our photon economy conversation we had with Michael Crow and the carbon capture team, and just why Arizona could really position itself as this climate technology testing ground, proving ground of sorts. We have a lot of solar D&I levels. We have tremendous regulatory policy that supports testing and validation of these ideas and technologies. And yeah, I know we're looking at a number of things in storage and water technologies. And so I wouldn't be doing GPEC a service if I didn't mention all of that excitement that's in that vein as well. And again, it just feels like, hey, there's challenges and there's going to be technologies that help solve some of these issues. So final question, I know we're getting short on time. I think we've got 2 minutes left here. I did want to come back to transmission, because I think a lot of people, again, they flip on their lights when they get home, or air conditioner, and it works. And, we expect that, right? But I think about the transmission grid, and I'd be curious if one of you would just give a quick, again, just a few minute tutorial on the Western grid limitations and opportunities, because I think that is something I keep hearing for the country, is something that's going to have to be advanced, is expanding the transmission infrastructure of the West. So anybody want to tackle that with just a few minutes remaining?
Well, I'll try to give you like 30, 45 seconds, and I'll let Ted add in. How's that? So
Sounds good.
I would describe it this way. There's certainly opportunities. There's going to be market opportunities in the Western US long term, and I'm not going to try to answer all that right now, because you're right, we wouldn't have time, but it's going to require build out. So I'll mention, even though there's these opportunities, the Western US is different than the Eastern US. Large, dense loads close together in the Eastern US, very different than the West. In the Western US, if you're going to run long high voltage transmission, you are going to have to cross federal lands, which means you're going to trigger a regulatory process called NEPA, which is an environmental process and a permitting process. If the federal government doesn't help us figure out how to speed that up, and instead of things taking 8, 10 plus years and getting that down, you will force us basically to go with local solutions, right? Because you can't hardly rely on that. I mean, I'm not saying there won't be some big projects done, but that's when you talked about the load growth that both of us are experiencing. I can't bank on a project that I can't control schedule on because it can get delayed, significantly. I'll shut up there, Ted, and let you.
No, spot on. And I think you illustrated nicely some of the challenges of building transmission, and what both of our companies recognize is the significant opportunities to transmission, particularly in the West. The West has such diverse resources that if used together through transmission access to different parts of the Western United States is actually the most efficient way to be able to serve customers. So you think about the fact that we have tremendous solar irradiance in the Southwest. Pacific Northwest has amazing hydroelectric capacity. Rocky Mountain region has terrific wind resources. With further transmission build out, each region can benefit and utilize the excess generation from their natural diversity of renewable generation in all of those respective areas. And we can then spread that power out more evenly throughout the West through the use of new transmission. It allows us to more affordably serve customers, maintain reliability, and benefit from further clean energy build out. And so when we think about building new capacity, it's not about just generation. Transmission and accessing some of those other market opportunities is a substitute for new generation locally. But to Jim's point, we got to be able to build the transmission. And that's more difficult than it should be, but that's something that both utilities are very focused on doing. Each of us has ambitious plans to build out transmission to take advantage of those market opportunities in the West. But given the lead time of those lines coming to fruition, it's still going to be several years out.
Well, I want to thank you both, Ted and Jim, for your time today. You're both incredibly busy and important individuals in our region. And I also like to recognize Carla and Mark and Kelly and Cameron. We get to work in the trenches with them every day, working with new customers to continue to advance the diversity on this economy. And I would argue we've made a lot of strides in the last decade. But as I talk with our internal team here, we're entering a new era where it's certainly more advanced industry, more complexity on every project, and we're certainly entering a new smart growth phase as well, where we can be very judicious about the types of companies we want to add to the complement of our region. So thanks to you both for joining us. Incredibly insightful, a wealth of knowledge, and I hope you join us again sometime soon to talk more about this important topic. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all.
Take care.
Yep, take care.